Listen to what this woman says. Apparently, the dogs are safe, clean, well fed, and taken care of until such time comes where they're tortured and abused in a lab and then killed. These puppies are 16 weeks old when they're ripped away from their mothers. They're then locked in separate cages where the mother is then forced to breed again, to have her babies ripped away from her again and again and again. These 16-week-old puppies have things shoved down their throat, chemicals put in their stomachs, and yet there's no actual proof that any of this testing works. After all, dogs and humans are completely different species. When you listen to Parliment discuss whether it's right to test drugs on these poor innocent babies, and then you see the footage of how these poor babies are treated, I get quite confused as to why it's so hard for the government to see it for what it is. Immorally wrong. Do you know what really pisses me off about this country? It's how thick the government pretend to be when it suits, and how much the government lie. They are supposed to serve the citizens of the country they govern, and yet you have people sitting in a cold room contemplating over the fact whether animal abuse is right or wrong. You have thousands of people telling the government and the right authorities that there are animals being abused, and yet they are allowed to come into Parliament and lie.
Move that this House has considered e-petition 705-384 relating to the use of dogs in scientific and regulatory procedures. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Jardine. I would like to begin by declaring an interest, as I am chair of the APPG on phasing out animal experiments in medical research, and I'm keen to ensure that this is achieved sooner rather than later. The petition is named Ban Immediately the Use of Dogs in Scientific and Regulatory Procedures. It was created by Maria Iriart and as of today has almost 236,000 signatures, which is an incredible achievement. And Maria is here today, so thank you for coming along. The petition goes on to say, as a first step to end animal testing, we want an immediate ban for dogs. They are commercially bred in what we see as bleak and inhumane factory-like conditions. We believe there is evidence suggesting that dogs are left being unattended for extended periods in a government licensed establishment. In 2023, 2,456 dogs were used in 3,749 scientific procedures. 734 of those procedures were classified as causing severe or moderate harm. There were 2,593 procedures for regulatory purposes, even though there is no UK legislation that mandates animal testing. These procedures can include oral gavage, where a tube is inserted into the dog's throat up to 3 times a day to administer liquids to the stomach. There are studies questioning the reliability and human relevant value of the outcomes of these tests. When looking at Hansard for other debates on animal testing, and particularly testing on dogs, I found an interesting starting point in the Protection of Dogs Bill of 1927 during a debate in the other place. In that debate from almost a century ago, Lord Banbury quoted the eminent surgeon, Sir Lambert Ormsby, who said, "Experiments on dogs may now be discontinued. All that can be found out by physiological experiments for application to human beings has long since been discovered, and repetitions are unnecessary and cruel." And yet here we are, nearly 100 years later, discussing the very same issue. An opinion poll conducted for the UK government by Mori in 2018 found that only 14% of the UK public feel it is acceptable to use dogs for medical research to benefit people. This is unsurprising, as we know dogs have high emotional and intellectual capabilities, and studies have found that they can feel empathy, sense sadness or fear, and demonstrate genuine human bonding. The UK Home Office regulator is intended to conduct assessments of the compliance of all licence holders, which includes on-site inspections and enforces standards for the care and accommodation of all animals bred, supplied or used for scientific purposes. And to enforce the regulations, establishments are required to have dedicated individuals, including vets with legal responsibilities for the care and welfare of animals, as well as an ethical review body. The Government responded on the 5th of March 2025 to clarify they do not agree to immediately ban the use of dogs for testing and research purposes in the UK. However, hopefully this debate will reignite that discussion and any subsequent decisions.
Give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I was visited by a constituent named Clara. She raised this issue to my attention. I was keen to come and hear and participate in the debate today. She's made two really important points. One is that this process has no legislative basis, and it also has no public consent. And so I hope that when the government listens to this debate today, we can look at how to take action to make sure that man's best friend is left alone as man's best friend.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I absolutely agree with everything you said. So it's important to note that the Labour Manifesto pledge commits the government to partner with scientists, industry and civil society to phase out animals in medical testing, stating that this is a long-term goal, which will need further scientific and technical advancement and validation to reach this point. The group Understanding Animal Research support the use of animal research currently in the UK. They say that in the UK, dogs are primarily used to find out how new drugs act within a whole living body and whether new medicines are safe enough to test in humans. Their genome has been sequenced, and so they are often used in genetic studies. Dogs are primarily used in regulatory research and as a secondary species alongside rodents. The dogs are mostly tested for areas including Duchenne, muscular dystrophy, anti-rabies vaccines, heart research and veterinary medicine. They state that research dogs live in large enclosures together with their pack mates. Lab technicians look after the dogs and play with them every day. The dogs are fed and watered daily, and the environment, lights, temperature, etc. is controlled automatically. They say that the cages are cleaned daily and the space is big enough to have a toilet area separate from the bed and play area. Dogs are intelligent enough to keep these areas separate, and there's plenty of space to allow them to do so. Because the dogs live together, their social needs are met by other dogs. Unlike pets, they do not require the constant company of humans. However, Animal Free Research UK disputes this quality of care. They say that applications for project licences to conduct animal experiments are very rarely refused, and answers to written questions submitted in Parliament indicate that over the past 7 years, only one licence has ever been rejected.
Would my honourable friend give way on that?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for making a powerful speech. I met Nutmeg this morning, a lovely beagle, which she recognised a large proportion of the dogs that are undergo medical scientific procedures are beagles. I believe it was 3,565 out of 3,770. And does she also agree with me that if the government won't commit right now to an immediate ban, that at least we have a clear time frame for when such a ban may come into place?
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend, and I agree with everything that you've said, that my honourable friend said. So, applicants are allowed to adjust and resubmit licence applications to enable them to be granted, and so for the last 4 years, some applications actually had a mean number of 2.55 iterations before they were granted. The Animals and Science Regulation Unit's annual report for 2023 stated that there were 169 cases of non-compliance with the law or with licence conditions. This was only a 3% decrease from 2022. These involved a total of 154,904 animals, representing an overwhelming 864% increase on 2022. Beagles were used in a study conducted by AstraZeneca to test a new, more eco-friendly propellant for use in inhalers. The test lasted up to 39 weeks and involved 72 beagles. The dogs were restrained by a tether and forced to inhale the gas for 2 hours each day through a mask fitted over their nose and mouth, held in place by a muzzle. Although the study states that the dogs had freely available access to water, it also states that water was withheld during the tests and for 16 hours overnight. This meant that dogs went without water for at least 18 hours each day, and at the end of the study, all the dogs were killed so that their tissues could be dissected for further study. The authors noted that the inhalers contribute only a small fraction of global HFA emissions, and really we have to ask, was this treatment of these dogs in this way really justified? In 2017, the Home Office released figures showing that 1.81 million additional animals were bred and not used for scientific procedures in Britain. However, We haven't had any additional data since, and the above-mentioned 1.8 million animals who were bred and not used included 97 beagles, and we have no idea what happened to the animals that were not used. Yes, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We are a nation of dog lovers, of animal lovers. Does she agree with me that there is widespread public support for setting out a roadmap to ending the use of animal testing, so that the very sad stories she's describing today can be left in the history books where they belong?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and again, I fully agree with everything you've said, and I really hope I'm going to speak a little bit about that later on, and I fully agree with everything that has been said. So, modern non-animal methods give the best possible chance of securing medical progress, since they're not hampered by translating from one species to another. An estimated 92% of drugs fail in human clinical trials, even though they have passed preclinical tests, including animal tests. Just over 30% of those that do pass are subsequently relabelled with warnings of side effects not predicted by animal tests, and almost 10% are completely withdrawn from the market. So, new non-animal methods based directly on human biology include the use of computer modelling and organ-on-a-chip technology, which can be much more relevant to the human body. And I went on a lab trip recently with the APPG on phasing out animal experiments in medical research to visit the Animal Replacement Centre of Excellence at Queen Mary University of London, and saw in person the pioneering work that is being done to provide medical breakthroughs without the use of animals.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point. Would you agree with me that there is a bit of a disconnect at the moment between the scientific possibility in terms of non-animal alternatives and what's actually happening in the ground? In the sense that for decades now we've had suggestions of ways that we can use non-animal alternatives, and yet we're not doing that. And would you commend the work of Cruelty Free International, who are actually producing a new list that explains exactly how you can switch from one type of experiments to the others tomorrow?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I fully agree with everything that you've said and that the honourable member said, and I'll speak about that in a minute. So, a study published in Nature Communications Medicine found that the non-animal liver-on-a-chip device was able to correctly identify 87% of drugs that carried a risk of liver toxicity in humans, despite these drugs having passed through animal safety tests. Another example is research at Edge Hill University, where scientists are developing a human cell model of the blood-brain barrier to study the link between irregular heartbeat and an increased risk of brain damage, stroke and dementia. Normally, large animals like dogs would be used to study heart disease, and so this work will be much more relevant to patients and provides a real case to phase out testing on dogs. Comprehensive analysis from a paper authored by Dr. Jared Bailey found that dogs are highly consistent predictors of toxic responses in humans, and that the predictions they can provide are little better than those that could be obtained by chance or tossing a coin when considering whether or not a compound should proceed to testing on humans. And one simple example of this is food like grapes and chocolate being poisonous to dogs, and some drugs that are safe for humans, like ibuprofen, are highly toxic to dogs, even in small doses. Animals are used in research because of their genetic similarity to humans, yet while we share up to 98% of our DNA with some animals, it's the small yet important differences that make us distinct. There are many historical examples of deadly drugs which appeared safe in animal tests. Thalidomide was tested safely with animals but caused severe birth defects in thousands of babies. Similarly, Vioxx was a painkiller which was linked to thousands of heart attacks and deaths, despite cardioprotective results obtained in animal tests, including in dogs. The current approach to alternatives from animal testing is to fund the development and dissemination of techniques that replace, reduce and refine the use of animals in research, more commonly known as the 3 Rs. Yet there is little funding, in relation to the point made earlier, for non-animal methods, as the APPG on human relevant science estimated that human relevant non-animal method funding represents between 0.2% and 0.6% of total biomedical research funding in the UK, and 0.02% of the total public expenditure on research and development. So, I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. And on that point, I think the previous government actually committed to doubling investment in this area. Is that something that, like me, she would welcome the current government at least matching, if not improving?
my honourable friend for his intervention, and I fully agree with everything that he has said. So, surely we must consider reversing our priorities, and this debate provides us with a prime opportunity to look at how we can fund future testing in the UK. In 2023, the Department of Health and Social Care confirmed that there is no United Kingdom legislation that mandates animal testing. The regulatory guidelines do recommend that new drugs are tested on 2 species before moving to human trials, but in 2023 the Department of Health and Social Care also stated that assessors will accept data from a suitably validated model that has been demonstrated to be predictive in lieu of animal data. So it is possible. In 2023, almost all regulatory tests on dogs were carried out to satisfy EU requirements, with only 12 regulatory tests on dogs being carried out to satisfy UK-only requirements. Cruelty-Free International reports that animal tests continue to be commonly used, even when validated alternatives exist. In the USA, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has released a new roadmap to reduce and replace animal testing in drug development and regulation, following the 2022 decision by US Congress to pass the FDA Modernisation Act, which facilitates the use of non-animal methods for drug testing. And recently, on the 10th of April, the FDA announced they are beginning to phase out animal testing for monoclonal antibody therapies, which is to ultimately be followed by other drugs. Canada, Australia and other countries within the European Union have all come up with roadmaps for ending animal testing, and it really is high time for the UK to join them. For the government to stop issuing licences for experiments using dogs, there must be a thorough overhaul of the licensing of animal experiments to really ensure that the basic legal requirements to use non-animal methods, wherever possible, are being properly enforced. Ending the use of dogs can be the first step in full transition to the cutting-edge, human-specific methods that offer the best possible chance of advancing medical progress. And as I close my opening remarks, I'd like to mention the Radio 4 Today programme from this morning, where Understanding Animal Research and Cruelty-Free International were discussing that this debate was taking place. And one question that was asked during this interview was about what happens to dogs after the research. It was confirmed that they are euthanised and dissected to look at their lived experience. And strangely, after this hard-hitting discussion on the lives of laboratory dogs in the Today interview, just after the 9 AM news, the announcer advised that the programme coming up at 9:45, called Wheels and Woofs, would look at disabled dogs living their best lives, something that a laboratory dog will never get to do. And I'm looking forward to hearing from other members and the Minister's comments.